Thus far, I had broken nearly every single so-called rule. 1. He will begin in the furthest corner of your basement. If you see him, do not overreact. He may decide to move on. I'm guessing that snapping the intruder in half and throwing him into a trash compactor counts as an overreaction. 2. If the intruder decides to stay, he will take one step closer each week. Based on my math, I had about 264 days to go until he reached my bedroom. Probably sooner, since he seemed to be moving faster now. 3. Do not attempt to speak with him, hurt him, or get third parties involved. I snapped him in half and threw him into a trash compactor. 4. Any violation of Rule 3 generally results in several quick steps forward, depending on the severity of transgression. That would explain why he's already in the center of the rec room. 5. Barricading the doors is acceptable. This will slow him down, but the process will be very loud, difficult to sleep. I might do this when the time comes, earplugs and white noise to sleep over the sound. 6. To others, the intruder will appear as a mannequin or a rubber dummy or a coat hanger, etc. Do not let guests near him. I don't even want to think about this one right now. 7. The intruder will not move forward so long as you have guests in the house. Guests who actually want to be there. Once, I had an old friend sleep on the couch for 3 months and the intruder didn't move a step. I have no friends. Not anymore. 8. You can leave the house, but never sleep anywhere else. Never make plans to move. Even browsing for houses online, etc. The importance of this rule cannot be understated. Okay, from there on out, I'd follow the rules until I thought of something better. 2 sleepless nights crawled by until I finally built up some courage to go back downstairs. I needed my phone. Down the basement hallway, in the center of the rec room, stood the coat rack, and just behind it, my phone lay face down against the concrete floor. Creeping forward, I averted my eyes. It's only a coat rack, I reminded myself. Nothing more, nothing less. Sliding into the rec room, I pushed myself back up against the wall and glanced towards the coat rack. Immediate regret followed. Nails and wires were snaked around the mangled shards of wood. If the coat rack was a substitute, then what did the actual intruder look like? An image flashed through my mind. The image of a gaunt man with carnival smile, held together with nails and wire. Creepy. I shook it off and leapt forward. Creepy. I shook it off and leapt forward, snatching my phone. I scrambled away and hauled up the stairs. I could almost feel the hands of nothing, chasing me from behind, ever-stretching arms desperate to pull me back into the dark, inching closer and closer for my ankles as I bolted up the stairs. I slammed the door shut, pressed my back up against it, breathing heavily. I slid down on the floor. It's just a coat rack, I told myself again. But the words rang empty now, like a parent telling their frightened child there's nothing to be afraid of. There's nothing hiding under the bed, when really they both know there is. There's always something hiding under the bed, but it's not a long-toothed monster you imagined as a child. It's not a boogeyman, it's a feeling. A hidden feeling you can't accept because you don't even know what it is. So instead, you pretend it doesn't exist. A vague and festering obligation you keep pushing back and back and back, always lurking just out of sight, hiding in your peripherals. Sometimes, you even catch a glimpse of it, lurking in the corners, only to look and find nothing. So, you shrug it off, you turn back to your phone, your booze, your pounding on the front door. What have happened to the doorbells? I got up, slinked over and pulled it open. There, on my doorstep, just as I expected, stood Howie. "Brandon," he said, wearing an oversized smile and an oversized white hoodie with blue baggy sweatpants. "Howie?" I said, fighting back the ever-growing pull of sleep deprivation. "Sorry to bother you so early, it's just..." He paused, looking over his shoulder and then back to me. "There's been a few break-ins around the neighborhood last night and... were you hit?" I shook my head. "No." "Fortunate." Behind him, in the driveway across the street, sat a red Kawasaki motorcycle. The first time I'd seen a vehicle over there. Anyways," said Howie. "See you around." He turned to leave and... "Howie?" He stopped, turned back. "Did you know them?" I asked, still watching the house across the street. "Mr. Carver? A little. He ran a restoration thing, fixed up our basement, and after a flood once, a nice man, but quiet. He didn't even want a funeral." I nodded. Howie smiled sadly and turned away. "Anyways, be safe out there." He strolled off, humming to himself as he went. Pulling the door shut, I turned back inside, took my phone out and... the screen was cracked. Spiderwebbed. "Should have bought a case, you stupid idiot." I dialed. The tone rang out a couple of times until... "Hello?" Mitch Carver and I met in a diner on the edge of town. A 2010s diner trying way too hard to look like a 1950s diner. Seriously. Every single greasy spoon cliché in the book. Movie posters plastered on the walls, all the waitresses wore those blue dress uniforms, and the grill of a turquoise Cadillac hung over the bar. Classy. Red-leathered booths were lined up against the windows. I sat there, staring blankly outside. Out across the highway sat abandoned middle-class suburbs, foreclosed 12 years back, graveyards of the '08 market crash. The ever-present drone of highway traffic reverberated in the air. Mitch sat across from me. He wore a leather jacket and a ball cap, his eyes distant and quiet. "You don't count as a third party?" I asked. Mitch eyed me, confused. "The rules. No third parties," I said. He shook his head. "No." "Why not?" "Already a believer." Studying him, I took a sip of bitter black coffee. He seemed sincere, but trustworthy? I wasn't sure. "Why does belief matter?" "I don't really know yet," he said, leaning back in his seat. He glanced back around the diner, almost like he was expecting someone. He turned back to me, suddenly serious. "You need to tell me what happened." "Excuse me?" "You said on the phone something happened that changed your mind." I raised an eyebrow. I hadn't told Mitchell about my rule breaking for several reasons. Mainly, I didn't want to set him off. For all his sincerity, Mitch did not seem like the most stable of individuals. Not that I blamed him, especially considering his life circumstances. "Why are you helping me?" I said. He looked out the window, his eyes flickering back and forth as traffic sped by. He turned back to me. "I killed my dad," he said. "I mean, not literally, but it's my fault he died." He weighed over his next words carefully, the traffic outside slowly droning ever louder, like a rising tide. Mitch continued. "The last few years of his life, nobody believed him. We all thought he was crazy, but he never talked about it straight up. He just left notes. Sometimes you'd go home after a visit and find one tucked away in your shoe." He cleared his throat. "The notes were always about this person hiding in his house. How they were literally trying to scare him to death." The front door chimed open. Mitch tensed up and glanced back over his shoulder. A family of 4 shuffled inside. He relaxed and turned back to me. "I just want to make sure that what happened to him doesn't happen to anybody else." He leaned back in his seat again, hands wrapped tight around a cup of untouched coffee. "Fair enough." "Look," said Mitchell, "if you broke the rules once, or even twice, that's fine, but you need to tell me what happened." I nodded slowly, took a deep breath, and I snapped the coat rack in half, threw it in the trash compactor. His eyes filled with shock. A shock he immediately repressed, like a doctor trying to act cool in front of a patient with a horrific test result. "And it came back the next day?" "Yeah, held together by nails and wire." Mitchell nodded. "How much further ahead was it?" The front door chimed open again, but this time he didn't look back. "About 10 steps from the corner," I said. Mitchell nodded, again trying to act like it was all good when it clearly wasn't. Another question dawned on me. Why does it look like a coat rack? Am I a guest in my own house? Mitchell shrugged. "None of the rules are set in stone. Did you buy the place with your own money?" "Yes, well, sort of. Mortgage." "Yeah, that shouldn't..." "Mitch?" A voice from beside us cut into the conversation. An older man, wearing a brown leather jacket and carrying a red bike helmet, tall, weary, and in need of a shave. Clint Eastwood vibes. "Mitch, where have you been?" he said, voice strained with sadness. Mitch looked away, acting like the man wasn't even there. "Mitch?" he said again, voice almost shaking now. I turned back. Mitch stared down at the coffee in his hands. His reflection rippled in waves in highway traffic rumble. His eyes were wet. "Mitch, please." The man leaned forward slightly. "I've been looking everywhere for... The stranger trailed off into silence and stepped back. He looked at me. His eyes were filled with years of suffering. He reached into his coat pocket, produced a card, and placed it face down on the table. He looked back at Mitch one last time. "I'm always here, kid." He smiled grimly, then turned away and wandered back to the exit. Hands on the door, he stopped and looked towards us. He opened his mouth to say something, but turned away, pushed outside, and stepped down into the gravel parking lot. He crossed the lot and climbed onto a red Kawasaki motorcycle. Then he looked back at me through the window, smiling sadly. Suddenly, his eyes lit up, darted back and forth for a couple of seconds, and then snapped back to vacant apathy, almost like someone had crawled into his mind, taken a quick look around and jumped back out, eyes back to sadness. He rubbed his forehead with the back of his thumb, pulled on his helmet, revved up the engine and sped off. "Mitch?" I said, still staring out the window. The realization of who that might have been was slowly dawning on me. It's not him," said Mitch. "Not anymore." I turned back. Mitch, hands shaking, took a sip from his coffee and set it down. "You wanted to know what happens when it reaches you." He threw up his hand as if to say, "Wish granted." I didn't fully understand what he meant by that, but right now wasn't the time to push. Mitch looked on the verge of tears. Reaching across the table, he grabbed the card the man had left behind and handed it to me. I turned it over and read, "Carver Restoration and Renovation. Owner, P.T. Carver. Mitch's father."